Picture yourself bound in thick rope, dragged under a ship's barnacle-covered hull that cuts like razor blades. Sailors feared this punishment more than death itself, keel-hauling. Bodies scraped against jagged growths while lungs screamed for air, consciousness fading into saltwater agony. Survivors emerged crippled, infected, forever broken. But what happened during those terrifying underwater minutes that made grown men shake at just hearing its name? Picture this. You're tied up with thick rope and dragged under the barnacle-covered bottom of a wooden ship. Even the ocean itself became a tool for punishment. This wasn't make-believe. This was keel-hauling. It was a type of punishment at sea that was so scary that just hearing the name made sailors in European navies shake with fear. Keel-hauling wasn't done just to be mean. It had a cold, practical purpose: to make people obey through fear. Back then, if sailors rebelled, it could destroy entire kingdoms and tear apart Navy leadership. Punishments had to be so harsh that just remembering them would keep men in line. The first records of keel-hauling in European navies show up in Dutch Navy documents. It was used in the middle of the 1600s, though not very often, and it didn't always kill people. There's a famous painting by Lieve Pieter, Verschuier, from around 1660 to 1686. You can see it today at the Rijksmuseum. It shows this punishment happening on Admiral Jan van Nesse's ship, while a big crowd watched. The Dutch word keelhauling, it means to drag the keel. That's exactly what they did. The Dutch were known as masters of the sea in the 1600s. They used keel-hauling against sailors who committed serious crimes. Things like running away from duty, rebelling against officers, being cowardly in battle, or hitting an officer. It was meant to punish one person and scare everyone else at the same time. Before modern Navy rules existed, keel-hauling also played with people's minds. Life at sea was lonely, and ship captains had huge amounts of power. This made sailors easy targets for abuse. So keel-hauling existed at the dangerous crossroads between keeping order and using terror. Long before keel-hauling disappeared from Navy rules, it left its mark on the decks of both military and civilian ships. Dutch warships used it to spread fear and keep the chain of command strong. British captains, though they used it less often, followed their example. And in the lawless world of pirates, where terror was a way to stay in control, this punishment found an equally cruel home. Jean-Baptiste Colbert served as Navy minister under King Louis XIV from 1669 to 1683. He put strict discipline in place to make French sea power stronger. He used tactics like forced galley labor and harsh punishment laws. Even though pirates operated outside government control, they also turned to extreme punishments. Some reports say they used keel-hauling to crush disagreement and keep order on their ships during an age of ruthless conditions at sea. How keel-hauling was carried out, a step-by-step process. To understand the pure cruelty of keel-hauling, you first need to understand how carefully it was done. This wasn't a messy punishment. It was organized, well thought out, and designed to cause maximum fear, if not death. The ship, the crew, and the sea itself all became tools of judgment. Keel-hauling usually started with someone formally reading the charges against the condemned sailor out loud. Officers, sometimes even the ship's captain, gathered the crew to witness what would happen next. The sailor was then tied up tightly with strong rope, with wrists and ankles secured. Often a heavy weight was attached to the legs to prevent fighting back or floating. 2 lines were used, one on each side of the ship with one passed under the keel and tied to the condemned person. Depending on which method they chose, the sailor was dragged from the front of the ship to the back, or more often from one side of the ship to the other under the hull. The trip over or along the keel was terrifying. Wooden ships in those early modern times, Dutch galleons, British frigates, and even pirate ships, collected thick layers of barnacles, coral, and sea growth. These jagged buildups turned the bottom of the ship into a bed of natural razor blades. While the sailor was pulled through the water, often by sailors working together to pull ropes from the opposite deck, his body got serious cuts from scraping against the jagged hull. Breathing was impossible. Being underwater, getting confused, and water pressure often made sailors swallow seawater, lose consciousness, or have seizures. If the condemned person survived the first trip, sometimes they were dragged multiple times. In cases like this, the ship's doctor might be present to bring the sailor back to consciousness between trips. This wasn't done out of kindness, but to make sure the punishment could continue. Pirates, though often thought of as lawless, maintained their own cruel codes. When keelhauling was practiced on pirate ships, it was usually for betrayal, informing on others, deserting, or stealing from fellow crew members. Black Bart Roberts was one of the most feared pirate captains of the Golden Age. He ruled with an iron code. His articles called for hanging for desertion and marooning for theft. While keelhauling isn't specifically mentioned as a punishment, reports from the broader pirate world suggest it might have been used in extreme cases. In the anarchistic closed world of pirate ships, where fear was often the only law, such cruel measures served one purpose: absolute control. The psychological effect on the watching crew was deep. No amount of screaming or whipping could communicate what one keelhauling brought in silence: obedience through the possibility of destruction. There was no certainty of death, but there was certainty of suffering. Survivors were left crippled, infected, and traumatized. Salt water made wounds worse. Infection was almost unavoidable in the time before antibiotics. Those who died often didn't die from drowning, but from the shock of pain or the fever that followed. Keelhauling was a punishment carried out with clinical precision and maritime discipline. Its horror didn't lie in chaos, but in control, making the ship a machine of suffering, with the barnacle-stained keel as the executioner's blade. This discipline wasn't just enforced, but also carved into flesh, into memory, and into the iron discipline of life at sea. A forbidden punishment when history left keelhauling behind. Even in the brutal world of maritime discipline, keelhauling eventually became too extreme to justify. When Enlightenment thinking began to influence military and naval behavior in the late 1600s and early 1700s, practices that were once seen as necessary tools of authority came under scrutiny. The turning point wasn't just a shift in moral philosophy. It was a strategic recognition that fear could no longer maintain effective control aboard a modernizing fleet. The Dutch were the first to abolish keelhauling, even though they were among the first documented practitioners. The Dutch Admiralty began replacing the punishment with more structured, less deadly punishments in the early 1700s, like whipping or long-term imprisonment. Pirates, who operated outside international laws, also abandoned keelhauling for more direct punishment methods. When piracy was declining in the early 1700s, pirate codes became more practical and in some cases more democratic. Mutineers or traitors were often quickly executed, through shooting or hanging. Keelhauling, with its prolonged suffering, lost its function because crews put efficiency above spectacle. By the beginning of the 1800s, ships became more complex, crews became more professional, and behavior codes became more structured. Naval institutions embraced standardized disciplinary systems, including recorded punishment registers, training procedures, and regulated court-martials. Keelhauling exposed how maritime power once relied on spectacle and terror, enforcing obedience through fear and scarring maritime memory. Letting it go marked a shift toward discipline shaped by law, proving that punishment shapes the societies we build. How do you think the transition from the barnacle-studded keel to codified justice changed humanity's view of authority at sea and on land? Comment below. Its echoes show how terror guarded the decks long before laws ruled the sea. Cesare Beccaria wrote in 1764, "The certainty of a small punishment will make a stronger impression than the fear of a more severe one."